afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay. Good afternoon. I am not the person you came to see, but I want to say a word of welcome to the First United Methodist Church of Rector. My name is Jacob Lynn. I'm the pastor. So just thanks for being here. We're happy to share our space with the community and to also support the museum that's just doing an amazing job. So thank you for being here. First, I'd like to welcome our Mayor, Teresa Roof, up for a couple of words. Mayor?
And a couple it will be. We want to welcome everybody to Rector. We're so happy to be able to help the community, the Rector Community Museum. If you haven't been there, please go. It's outstanding. They've worked really hard, and it is something to see. It will take you more than a couple of hours, take you more than a couple of days to see everything. My job is to introduce Joanna Carter. We're so happy to have the Carters here. When Mr. Bill's mother and daddy were still alive, they were my neighbors. They lived just 2 houses down from me, and they were really sweet people. And I've met Mr. Bill several times over the years, and we're thankful to have them here today. And I know this is going to be very entertaining and very informative at the same time. So, Miss Joanna, we'll turn it over to you. You want to do this, Mr. Bill?
No, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Let me make sure. Can you hear me?
A little closer.
Like this?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. Well, I'm Joanna Carter, and I'm going to introduce my father. And one of the things that often happens is people will ask about my father, or they'll say, tell me a little bit about him. And so when I tell them, I say he's worked in the Secret Service for Kennedy and Johnson. He helped get the Rolling Stones into the United States after being banned to help them tour. He helped his friend Fred Smith launch Federal Express. He represented Jimmy Hoffa. He worked with Reba McEntire and helped her get to superstardom. He got Steve McQueen's body out of Mexico. He also worked with Bill Gaither and Billy Graham. Often I get a blank stare and they think I'm lying. So, but what my sister Julia, who's here today, Julia is on the front row. My sister Julia and I are very proud of our dad and all the accomplishments that he's done in his life, but we're more proud of the father that he is and what he has taught us. And he's taught us to be independent and have a good work ethic and to be passionate and positive about everything in our life. And those are the things that he learned from growing up in Rector, from his parents. And those are the things that were instilled in him and that he's instilled in us. And those are the things that we value. And we also, like I said, are very proud of all of his accomplishments. So with that, let's get started about you growing up in Rector. And tell me about growing up in Rector and how important it was to grow up in a small town and to have the parents that you had and what they taught you and instilled in you.
Well, Rector was a very important part of my life, of my early development, and my parents were not well off by any means. They didn't own a car and own a house. They were laborers. And so many times I've said how blessed I was to have been born in Rector, a poor community with poor parents. And they taught me to survive. And they taught me discipline, and they taught me a work ethic. And, I've always seen that hard work develops opportunities. And that's something I learned from my folks and in Rector. And the community of Rector was as a community, was very good to me. People helped me. So many people helped me. I couldn't name them all. So I credit Rector for much of my success in life.
And you speak of a time when you were a teenager, and it was a pivotal event that happened when you got expelled from high school. So talk about that event, and you say that event actually is one of the most important things that ever happened in your life, really. So.
Well, there's two events kind of happened about the same time. 5 of my buddies, we all went out one night and had a few beers in an old abandoned house out here outside of town. And we started a fire and it got out of hand and the house burned down. That was an old dilapidated house, and didn't amount to anything, but we got arrested and put in jail. The sheriff was Joanna Wolf, and so we're in jail. I get out, and he found out we'd been expelled from school. Well, actually, not all of us, just me and Jim Parham and Larry Elmore, just three of us. So my dad had taken me back to the school board, and they refused to reinstate me. So I'm out. I'm a junior. I guess maybe had turned 16. And so Joanna said, well, we're going to get you back in school. So he took me to the school board, and he said, you know what, I'm not asking you to reinstate Bill to school. I'm ordering you to do it. And from this day forward, I'm responsible for his life. So if he creates any problem in the school, come to me, I'll deal with it. But he said, I can assure you, you'll never have another problem out of Bill Carter. Well, when I got out of jail, I got home, and Daddy got me home. My mother was sitting on the chair bawling. And I said then, I'm never going to hurt my mother again. And I'm afraid of Joanna Wolf. So I went back to school, and I never caused another problem. When I got out of high school, then I tried to live a reasonably model life.
So after high school, your parents, they made everybody when they turned 18 to be on their own, or that was part of their.
Well, when you get out of high school, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Mother and Daddy had so little income, they couldn't support. And when a kid became an adult, it was your responsibility to go to work. My oldest brother Donald went in the Navy in World War II. Richard went in the Air Force, and Doris went to St. Louis to work. And so now I'm 17. I'm out of high school. And first I thought I'd go to St. Louis to work, but anyway, I ended up joining the Air Force. And at 17, I'll remind you, and there's no phones in those days, I'm off on my own, scared to death, away from Mama and Daddy in the military. And it was quite an experience, and a good experience. So I went in the Air Force. I stayed in the Air Force 4 years, and enjoyed every minute of it. And then I heard that you can get out a little early if you register in college. So I thought, well, I hadn't planned to go to college, but I could get out 90 days early if I signed up for college. So I called a registrar at ASU, and they loved it. Said, yeah, come here, we'll enroll you. So I signed up, and that got me out of the Air Force 90 days early. I went to ASU, not really intending to go to school, just to get out early. And I got there, and I was a veteran and kind of cool on campus, and I thought, hey, this is not so bad. So I just stayed and ended up graduating.
You must have thought of the sheriff during that time, if you're saying it. If you're saying you didn't know if you, anyway. So you got married, you were in college, and then after college, you got a scholarship to go to economics grad school at SMU. And so while visiting the school, you were visiting also your brother Richard, and he was taking the civil service exam. And the civil service exam, you want to explain what that is real quick? Just because
Well, at that time, I don't know if they still do that or not, you could take a civil service exam if you qualified for a government job in any field. They would select you off the roster. Now, Richard was going down to take it because he was a photographer, and he thought he might get a job with the government photography. And I wouldn't do anything, so you want to ride down with me? I said, sure. So we get down there, and we're sitting in this room, and this lady comes out. She was about 42 years old. I thought she was kind of elderly. And so she came out to get Richard, and she looked at me and said, are you taking the exam? I said, no, I'm just here. I just came with him. She said, well, just sit here all this time. You might as well take the exam. It'd be good for you. And so I was so intimidated by her, I went in and took the exam. I didn't care. So anyway, now at SMU, it was a rich school. My scholarship didn't cover the tuition. And I got on campus, and all the kids were driving BMWs. I was in my old 54 Ford. And I was so intimidated by that, I just didn't know what I was to do. And I wandered around a few days and called a few friends back in Arkansas. I said, why don't you go to law school? So, okay, why not? I still got some GI Bill. So we got in our old 54 Ford and drove to Fayetteville and enrolled. I got there a week late, and Dean Barnhart still worked it out for me to get started in law school. So I've attended law school for a year and a half. All my money ran out, and then I thought State Farm was hiring insurance investigators, and I thought that's a good opportunity for me. So I was going to take a job at State Farm, and then
You got a call.
there was a pivotal phone call.
Yeah.
I get a phone call, and this guy said, I'm Leroy Latier of the United States Secret Service, and I heard you were looking for a job. And it kind of shocked me because I never heard of the Secret Service. I didn't know what this was about. And he said, well, you are Bill Carter. I took your name from the civil service exam. And then it dawned on me, you know what? I'd forgotten about that. I didn't take that exam down there. So he said, well, I'd like to come up and interview. He came to Fayetteville, interviewed me, and then I went down for an oral interview. I was hired, and then just immediately, I was in Washington, D.C. Remember, I'm from Rector, Arkansas. My mother and dad would have never imagined I'd ever meet a president of the United States. And suddenly, I'm in training in Washington. That training entailed going to school during the day and at night working a shift at the White House with a senior agent. So you'd go over there at night and accompany that agent on his rounds all night. So you'd learn on the job training. You'd know what to do when they did assign you there. So, I mean, I've hit the big time from Rector.
And what year was that? 62?
That was in 1962.
Yeah.
Early 62.
So you were really a young agent, and you talked about the training and everything, and talk about one of the times when you had to prep the president, or prep the city of Little Rock for the president, and that your officer above you had recommended that you help with that since you knew Governor Faubus.
Well, I'd gone to law school with Farrell Faubus, the governor's son, and I got to know the governor. Well, I actually worked in 2 campaigns against him, but I observed him on the campaign trail and decided I was on the wrong horse, so I got to know him. And he was just known to be a segregationist, and it was very controversial in those years about segregation. And Kennedy was identified as a liberal at that time, and Faubus had criticized him publicly in interviews with the press. So the White House was concerned about him coming to Arkansas because of the fear of assassination. So since I knew the governor, they said, we'd like for you to join the senior agents and advance the security for the state because we need you to go to Faubus and get the help of state police. So I did that, and we had a very successful trip to Arkansas, I might add.
Yeah, and you were talk about the things that happened. I know that with my mother, Jan Carter. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. When my then wife Jan wanted to come out and meet the president, so I put her in the VIP section and told Faubus, and we had all these important people in the VIP section. And there was Jan, who nobody knew who she was. Everybody was asking them, well, who's she? So the president came down, and this is after another event I'll tell.
Yeah.
But he came down shaking hands, and he saw Jan. She had a PT 109 boat on her dress, and he looked at
your microphone fell. Hang on a second.
I think it fell down.
Hang on a second. Let's see.
so noisy.
Enjoy this thing.
There you go. Is that better?
Is it all right?
Yeah. Okay, time out. Okay.
So the president stopped and talked to Jan about the PT 109, and everybody's saying, who the hell is that? I mean, there's all these important dignitaries waiting for the president, and he's hung up with Jan. And there's a famous picture of him standing there talking to Jan, and that was so cool. But before that, we were all at the Coachman's Inn Hotel, the Secret Service agents in Little Rock, and the Beverly Hillbillies were staying at the hotel. They were doing a state fair then, and y'all won't remember this, but there was one of the stars was Donna Douglas and Ellie Mae, and we somehow got acquainted with Ellie Mae, and she said, "I want to meet the president." And so all the senior agents pointed to me, so well, Bill can take care of that, no problem. So I was so flattered that they had designated me to do this. So I told her, look, I'll put you in the VIP section, and when the president comes, I'll introduce you. So now, Pierre Salinger, the press secretary, was on the first helicopter that arrived before the president. And he got off the helicopter and he saw Ellie Mae. She stood out because this is a VIP section. There's not many Ellie Mae's in the VIP section. And so Pierre screamed, who put her in here? And everybody pointed, all the agents pointed at me. And he ripped me so bad in front of several hundred people. And I admit, I wanted to respond appropriately, but I didn't. So anyway, so Donna, who was terribly embarrassed, said, look, I'll leave. I don't want to cause any trouble. And I said, now I'm so mad at Pierre, I'll figure a way around this. So I said, look, just get back in the crowd in the VIP section so you're not so obvious. And the president will come by. You won't get to shake his hand, but don't worry, maybe I'll see an opportunity to introduce you. So Kennedy comes by and he's shaking hands, and he walks a few feet, and he looks back, and he walks a few more feet, and he looks back over there. And finally he said, who's that? I said, that's Donna Douglas, the Beverly Hills. He said, bring her forward. So she came up, introduced her, he shook her hand, had a picture made with her, and I looked at Pierre and gave him a very stern look.
You also got a picture too.
But that was so Kennedy. I mean, he was such a charmer, and he loved people. I asked Jan, what did he say? And she said, oh Lord, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but anyway.
Well, I mean, you often speak, it has been hard for you to speak about Kennedy and what an amazing man he was, and just even the short amount of time that you worked with him. And I mean, I know it's hard for you to talk about, but briefly talk about the day that he was assassinated. And, I know a lot of people talk about the controversy, but talk a little bit about like what the Secret Service did before he went to Dallas, and then where you were on the day that he was assassinated.
Well, when he was in Arkansas, when he returned to Washington, I returned to Washington with him to take an advanced Secret Service training course. So I was there for 6 weeks prior to the day he was assassinated. And on that day, on that Friday, I'd finished my course, and I was on my way back late that day to Little Rock. And we were having lunch. The chief of the Secret Service, James Rowley, was taking the 12 agents to lunch that were in this course. And we were at O'Donnell's Seafood Restaurant, half a block from the White House. And the waiter came to our table and said, Chief Rowley, you've got a phone call at the bar. He went to the bar and he came back, and I'll never forget how visibly shaken he was. And he said, the president's been shot. Carter, you and Lou Good, and there's 2 others, I don't remember who it was. You go to the White House immediately and take charge. There are no Secret Service agents in town, because the president, the vice president, and the wives were all on this trip. That meant that every White House Secret Service agent was out of town. So there's no one on duty at the White House. So the four of us went, he assigned the other 8 agents to different duties around the city. And so I went to the White House and stunned and went on duty and remained there and monitored the information in Dallas until we knew the president was dead. And then the head of the Secret Service said, I want you to stay here and meet President Johnson when he arrives. Stay with him until he retires. And I did that then. So then I got off duty at 2 a.m. I went back to the Willard Hotel, which if you've been to the Willard lately, it's been remodeled. Because back then it didn't have air conditioning. And it had the old high ceiling that had the radiators for heat. Well, that was a good thing because everything I had was dirty and stuffed into a suitcase to leave town. So I get back at 2 a.m., I take a few things out like socks and underwear, wash them out in the sink and put them on the radiator so they were dry. And like in an hour and a half, I get a phone call. You're expected back on duty at 4 o'clock at the White House. The president's body is going to arrive, and you report back to duty. So 2 hours later, I'm back at the White House in the same suit, clothes, and that was an event. In fact, all of these events haunted me for my life. Writing the book helped me with mental therapy because for 35, I wrote the book because of these girls, because they never asked me about anything. And I knew that they would someday need to know this historical information. So anyway, that when I got to the White House, they brought the casket, and I don't know if you've ever done a White House tour, but you come in that gate that goes into the West Wing, which is where the president's office is. The hearse pulled into the gate and unloaded the casket, and the military honor guard brought that casket from the gate all the way to the East Room with staff and friends standing as it went by. And it was such an emotional moment. And brought the body in the East Room, and then the family viewed the casket. Jackie asked it to be opened. Took some of his hair. And then again, the military officers stood out so with the medals on their chest, standing crying. So it was a terrible time for me.
And I know it's hard for you to talk about, and
then I stayed with the Kennedys and the coffin for the next 4 days, and wherever the coffin went, I went with Jackie as well, the kids. There's some here, one of the most famous pictures. Some news people said it was the most widely distributed photograph in the history of photography of the Kennedy family going up the steps up to the rotunda of the Capitol. So I stayed with to accompany the body to the funeral. When we got to the funeral, then I was assigned to leave and go out to the cemetery and await the arrival of the body to the cemetery. I did that. When he arrived and was buried, then I was signed back to the White House, And I stayed there with Johnson until Wednesday. They didn't post my duty. And so I'm not assigned to the White House anymore. So I called my boss and said, look, I don't have an assignment now, so I guess I'll be headed back to Arkansas. And he said, well, I know you're a wreck, and I suggest you take a week off. So I said, good idea. And here's the ironic thing. My sister lived in Dallas, of all things, and the senior agent doing the Kennedy trip down there was a good friend. I sent him to talk, visit my sister and her family. My mother and dad were there. Remember, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. So after Latier told me, you better hide out because they might be looking for you. So I said, okay. And he said, don't tell anyone where you're going. So I went to the airport because now I got a 2 a.m. flight, and it's like in the afternoon. So I go to the airport to hide out because there's no cell phones. There's no way they could find me. So little did I know that Thomas Kelly, the senior officer of the Secret Service, had been assigned to the Warren Commission. And Kelly liked me. Now, I'm a young guy. Most of the senior agents were late 30s and 40s. And Kelly said, I want Joe Carter on that Warren Commission. And he called Latier, and Latier said, I'm sorry, I don't know where he is, he's not available. Well, he didn't give up. He got my personnel file, he got all my family, and he started calling my family. And he called Alice, my sister, and he paid her. He said, well, he's going to be here in the morning. And they said, well, pick him up at the airport and take him straight to the Secret Service office. He's on duty at 8 o'clock in the morning. I arrived at 6:30. My brother-in-law met me and said, I've got to take you to the Secret. That's Thanksgiving. And they drove me to the Secret Service office. I went on duty at the Warren Commission and stayed until the next March. So, and I told him, I said, one thing, I gotta have some clean clothes. Take my suitcase out to Mother and Doris and have them wash some clothes for me because I'm desperate for some clean clothes. So there I am now with the Warren Commission.
Yeah, and then you did that for, I know a lot of people, we could talk about the Kennedys for probably this Secret Service for hours, but I wanted to sum it up real quick on that so we can get on to a little bit more. But like, people always ask, do you think that Oswald did it? And I know you feel very strongly that he did, and I think it's important to hear that point of view from you real quickly if you want to talk about that.
Well, and I want to point, you may have some questions about Kennedy, and I'll take questions later, and I'll answer any question you have about him personally. There's no doubt that I loved Kennedy. He was the most charming guy, and I thought a great leader. That what did I know? I was very young, but I knew from some of the events whispered to me by the senior agents who observed all that, what a great leader I thought he was. So I will talk more about him if you have any questions about him. But the Warren Commission, when I got to Dallas, I was assigned to the Oswald family because they thought they didn't know anything and thought they might be assassinated. They were witnesses, they knew too much. And Marina, Lee's wife, I was assigned to her son and his brother, Robert. And the interesting thing, Robert was vice president of Acme Brick Company, a very successful businessman and very smart. He was college education. Lee never finished high school. He'd been on a psychiatric care since he was age 7. He lived with his mother all his life. Robert was put in an orphanage at a very early age. And I said, oh, what a blessing that was, because in the orphanage he got love and support and education. And Lee stayed with his mother and ended up under psychiatric care. So I knew the